Would humble beginnings be the best phrase, the best and most overly used common phrase to describe this album? Yes. Now, when it comes to Awful Saturdays, this one is the first in the trilogy of the Normal Past tapes. And if you've listened to the Fuck Yeah Fridays retrospective that was released last Wednesday, you know that I came up with the name when working for, what was that company called? For John Malloy's Right Way. There you go. It was Right Way Industries of selling air conditioning units and heating units. I came up with it while walking around a Lowe's one day with a bunch of those cards in my hand looking for someone, anybody who wanted to buy an $11,000 air conditioning system. Spoiler alert, it never happened and I got fired. But around when we first started around when I first started the job, and I believe the producer was working for Express Scripts at the time, while I was walking around, I was thinking of the band Odd Future, being that this is around the time when I first listened to the Cherry Bomb LP, and I just randomly thought to myself, hey, instead of just making the Big Daddy records and having the producer just feature on them as a backup singer, or a feature, how about we just make our own group so we can both rap at the same time and it won't feel so awkward, being that, because if you look at the first Big Daddy record, there's or actually a couple of them, you see that there's a lot of features from the producer Dynasty on them. So I thought, you know what, we need to make a group, like a 2-person group. And for some reason, I just thought, being at the time that Odd Future had disbanded, which I also am in agreement with a lot of the OF fans, that it wasn't too good of an idea for them to disband and them just to all go and do their own side projects. Even though it was a good idea, I wanted the band to still stick around, so to say. So what I thought is that, well, I guess we're just going to have to pick up the pieces. I have all this free time. The producer at the time has all this free time before he started going to medical school. So I thought, how about let's just reverse the letters and make our own band, NP, Normal Past. Get it? It's a play on words. Odd Future, Normal Past. So that's how that all started. That is the genesis of Normal Past. It happened while I was bored, walking around with no one wanting to buy any systems from me at a Lowe's of all places. Like, you think, well, why is this guy here trying to sell me an $11,000? Anyways, so Awful Saturdays, which does have a picture on it for the first Normal Past record of a woman. For legal reasons, I will not be giving out her name or where she lives, but she used to be a friend of mine and Dynasty's at the time. This had to have been back in about 2014 to 2015, I believe. The friendship finally ended 2016, which actually was the start of the album after this on the Big Daddy record. If you have listened to the retrospective of Fuck Yeah Fridays, we actually end the record with a track about her, which was actually the end of the friendship. Technically, it was my fault, and I felt terrible about how she was treated in the end, like verbally and whatnot. But anyways, back to the record. So with this record, it is a humble kind of record, coming in at 10 tracks with this one. The other ones, obviously for the LPs, we usually max out at 12 plus a bonus track, but with this one, it was a special one where this ended up being one of the shortest LPs that we have created. This was 2015. It came out April 17th. And when it comes to this record, this one is my personal favorite, where this one was actually the record that was asked by the producer Dynasty for me to do a retrospective on. He actually asked me to do this last week, saying, hey, this is also my favorite record that we've ever made. Can you do a 1-hour retrospective on the history and everything you remember on this album? And I said yes, because I am now a security guard and I don't do shit there. So here we go. Now, to begin, Awful Saturdays, it is also a play on words. For another name for it, you could just call it Hangover Saturdays. The word Awful Saturdays being that now there is a connotation attached to Urban Dictionary of the new meaning of awful nowadays in 2020 being, it pretty much means a white woman doing too much, like a Karen. But for awful, for here, Awful Saturdays refers to that pretty much every Saturday for, I had to say, about 5 years, waking up almost every morning, being badly hungover, vomiting, waking up just being sick the entire day, calling out of work. Actually, around this time period when I kept getting booked on Saturdays to go to work to sell air conditioning units, I've actually called out a couple times saying that I kept getting the same virus to my boss, which eventually it led up to him firing me. So the Awful Saturdays, it's more of just to start the trilogy of the weekday series or weekend series. Saturday, Sunday, the first one, well, the second one was, so Friday, Saturday, Sunday. This one for Awful Saturdays, it just pretty much means that we were drinking, the drinking was so hardcore and so out of control at the time that there was no way possible that you weren't going to ruin your entire Saturday. So that's why we named it this. So there's a girl on the cover. Obviously, like I said before, we won't be releasing the name of her or where she lives or any of that information. But she sent me actually 3 pictures at the time where she was into steampunk and cyber goth, and she had just used a part of her paycheck to buy masks. And this was one of the pictures that she sent, and as a joke, I said, hey, why don't we just use this picture since so many rappers and artists put up like stereotypical pictures of a woman on their cover or them with a bunch of women that are half naked or whatever. So I thought, as a joke, how about for our first album, we put up a picture of her on here wearing this weird mask. And then, so what happened was I sent it over to the producer, and then he did some Photoshop on it and then made the cover. So I actually just took the picture from the girl and then sent it to him, and then he made the cover that you see before you on Neil Hospital Studios. So this one coming in, like I said, humbly at 10 tracks, April 17th, 2015. And I do have a couple of features. This is actually possibly the first feature on track 5 where Buck Strickland actually makes his debut. So it's actually track 6, Big Daddy Pop-Up Joints, You Know Who I'm Really Afraid Of, Luigi, Man, That Fucker Makes Me Uncomfortable. Oh, it actually says featuring Project. Okay, Buck Strickland is Dead City Radio. So Project, already know about him from the last retrospective of last time I made one of these podcasts. But this one for Dead City Radio, when Buck Strickland actually comes in and he talks about not being able to pick up a girl at the time in 2015 at the record store that we used to frequent. So that's actually, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that is his debut on our records, and this is way before we made the Some Young Boys EP, and currently still working on the LP, also with Buck Strickland, whenever it is that, if it does get made or not, has his own LP in the works. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with this album. I actually remember starting this. I remember the first night we recorded this album, actually, if you guys can believe it, being that I was so crossfaded and so ridiculously drunk at the time of making this. We actually, what came in the mail at the time, and this was when I was living by myself at Shadow Tree Apartments back when I was selling those air conditioning units, and I still had some money left over from my inheritance to pay my own bills, where my father was also helping me pay bills, being that I was on a semi-work time basis. So I actually remember the first track, What came in the mail for that Friday night was UFC 20, and I got it on a VHS tape, and it's actually you would consider somewhat of a rare pay-per-view, even though it was on a grimy, old, beat-up VHS tape. I actually had to spend quite a bit of, it was like 20 to 30 bucks plus shipping and handling. So it was a bit of a rare tape that I wanted to get because we were trying to watch all the UFCs in a row. So if I didn't mention this on last week's show, how we end up making these recordings at the time is that we would watch a UFC pay-per-view or a Pride pay-per-view that we did once, or we would watch UFC Unleashed and then bet on the fights. And then after we got through 4 to 5 shots, or at the time Jaeger bombs, around with drinking while drinking beers or Hornsby. Actually, at the time we were drinking Hornsby and Strongbow. Okay, so this is the time back in 2015 going to Hagen's to get our stuff first. But actually, Hagen's was Camino Seco Village. So this was when I was living by myself, and then we would play Mario Kart afterwards, okay? So every time we recorded this, we were already very drunk, which is so surprising and surreal in some aspects, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, how did these guys record this stuff if they were just so wasted? My answer is I don't know. So I remember that after the pay-per-view was ended, we actually recorded the first track, which was Neil Introduction. And we actually took this from an album, which is one of my favorite rap albums that has ever come out. I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside. We actually took the instrumental from the first track from that Earl Sweatshirt tape that actually just came out at the time. So good grief, the music video was about to come out once we started recording for this first album. And I remember that the producer Dynasty won the last bet, I believe whatever the finals in the UFC 20 tournament was. And then while being super wasted to the point where we were stumbling and falling down and I don't know how we focused enough on so many tracks in order to get it finished, and then he would even produce it in the same night. So I don't know if we had just a better tolerance for alcohol or not. I mean, that's what it sounds like to me as to what happened. But we recorded this. I'm not sure if I already had lyrics ready or if I was writing them while we were listening to the beat. I actually don't remember that part, but I remember right after this, when we recorded this song, is actually when I either had gotten fired or I was about to get fired. Either way, it was during a weekday that the producer Dynasty came over and we took pictures around my car, and then ended up making the short The Beast is Blunt Father EP, where we actually did it in a day. This was right after we recorded this first track. I remember that happening, being that this was like a Wednesday or a Thursday at the time. Being that I only lived in this apartment complex by myself before I moved in with Buck Strickland. I only was living there for about 4 months or 5 months until we moved in, and then stayed there for another 2.5 years. Okay, so when we made this, I remember that the producer was saying, I want to throw in some different kind of kooky sounding sound effects when doing our dubs. He said, I want this to sound kind of weird, like a Tyler record, because we did the play on words thing. So that's why he's making some weird sound effects he's never made before in previous LSG Street mixtapes. It's a completely different style that the producer Dynasty, where he went from gangster rap or doing a smooth, free-flowing R&B style of rap music with dubs, where he was getting more strange and more weird on the records. This is the first time I remember him doing things that were that I would say is questionable on a record. Like the same exact thing I was doing, just a little bit more strange. Jaime is a fuckboy guy interlude, 37 seconds for the second track. Now, for this track, for this one, there was something specific that happened at the time, back in, I believe, between 2014 to 2015, of very grave personal matters involving the producer. I won't get into detail about it because this is already a whole buried, dead and gone, it's already in the grave kind of subject. I'm only bringing it up for the purpose of the retrospective, but it had to do with a guy named Jamie, or Jaime. And at the time, back actually when I was living by myself at the Camino Seco Village up until Shadow Tree Apartments, where I was also living by myself at the time, during bouts of insanity, or not insanity, insomnia, it actually could have been both, I would put on Bill Nye the Science Guy episodes on some kind of streaming service. I don't know which one I did, but this would be at 12:31 in the morning. If I couldn't sleep, I would just put on, at the time I was putting on episodes, maybe trying to reminisce and have nostalgic feelings from my childhood. I just felt, you know what, I'm just going to put on these episodes until I fall asleep. This is before that, well, this was before I discovered ASMR. So when we made this interlude, and I came on as a guy at the end, brought to you by Land Surveying. If you don't want a 3, you're going to have to get in between that pussy that is. So for that, it was a short little interlude to lead into the next song, which was Fat Ass Woo. And with this one, we purposely used a Ryan Leslie beat, being at the time, I believe it was on Ryan Leslie's birthday. And if you guys don't know who he is, please look him up. He's a great producer, very interesting to watch. The producer Dynasty is actually in his fan page, and that producer, Ryan, actually gave him his phone number at the time. I remember that happening back when he used to live on 5th Street. So with this song, I do remember that the week before, when we were making tracks, or when we made the Neil track, while I was very drunk, I actually wrote out the first 8 bars for this track that you hear in Fat Ass. So obviously meant to be a party beat. We meant to just have it as a fun kind of thing, like a fun kind of feel to it. Nothing too, we tried to make it very exciting, but nothing too deep at the same time. Just kind of one of those party instrumentals, feel good kind of beats to give the introduction in a way of us being around beautiful women, being around cool guys, whatnot, at the bar kind of thing. So nothing really too deep with this one. It's just, I actually remembered that I took the chorus. It's actually just a rework of Craig Mack's Flavor in Your Ear. I believe at the time that that was a song that I was bumping a lot at the time. This is after Ray Shremmerd and after TJ McConaughey, or I Love Mackinum. I forgot what the names of these artists were, where I was constantly playing their music, but this was before Gehenna at the same time. I'm a classic man. So I go into these spurts where I will listen to one song, like most people I would assume, over and over and over again. And Craig Mack's Flavor in Your Ear, you can obviously tell if you've heard that song and you listen to the chorus of this one. Also, I don't want to run past this track without giving you guys information on the ending of the song. It was actually a run-on joke that started, I believe, with this track, where I said, where did your model bitch go? So I'm implying in this song that when it comes to the producer Dynasty, when it comes to him and having like this aura of him having all these models, basically just being like a Trey Songz kind of guy or Gucci Mane, like this aura that we built around the character around the producer dynasty. Pretty much doing the same thing with me too. Being more that I'm more of the obviously the alternative version of like two styles clashing into one to make this. But at the same time, at the end of the song, where I say, "Where did your model bitch go?" This was a song where we're trying to give the audience a feel of, whoa, these guys are really cool. These guys are someone that you want to emulate. You want to be like them. It's like, oh, wow, I'm in an episode of Atlanta and these guys are like Paperboy. Okay. So with this at the end of it, the joke we were implying was that we're actually lame. We're white. We don't get any models or dime pieces or things like that. Like, it's just in the form of like a playful joke kind of thing. So that's why you hear that at the end of the song, which is a small skit that goes throughout, I believe, 3 different albums, and I believe it started with this track. Now the next one, This Creamed Corn Tastes Like Cream Crap, at 3 minutes and 9 seconds. This one, I would say, is my second favorite song on the album. It is, I believe, the second best I've done with my rapping skills, I believe. We pretty much, at the time, I took this from, I actually bought Doris, the first Earl Sweatshirt album, from a library, I believe, somewhere in Atlanta, somewhere in Georgia, or somewhere in Mississippi, or something like that. I bought it off eBay from a library at the time, and then when I was playing it in the car for that week, one of the songs on there was Whoa, and that's where we took the instrumental. So you can see with this album, there is big influence of Earl Sweatshirt and his style and his instrumentals that some of them, the producer dynasty, did cut and scratch up to make it a little different, like what we did on, if you listen to the retrospective of Fuck Yeah Fridays, he would chop and slow some of the instrumentals. So not too much of that on this record, but it did happen a little bit with this one. We pretty much just emulated Doris, but at the time, I wanted people to be able to chant the song who listened to it just as if they were doing golf wang for Norm Past. So NORMPAST, that's the, that's a part of, that's actually the second line of, there's 2 choruses in this. That's the second chorus. The first one, Thursday nights, you know that Ricky's cooking. Normies know, that's NORMPAST. Hubba Mulligan, women I'm hooking. Thursday nights, you know Ricky's cooking. I believe that's the lyrics. So with that one, this is actually the end of the producer dynasty's marriage at the time, and you can hear that there are subtle influences of that on this first record. If you listen to it, actually, of how we record, which I said on the last episode, or the first episode actually, is that when we record, we do 1 track a week, usually for 1 record. So 10 tracks, it took 10 weeks to make this, essentially. I believe so. With this specific record, each track, we only did 1 track per week, or per every 2 weeks. So anyways, getting back to it. So it was actually an unfolding that happened, and that's where I'll just end it with the producer dynasty. It was an unfolding kind of, so it was actually one concept that was made that we both agreed to for a arc to make our story, and then there was actually a subplot that was unfolding in real life with him and also with me at the same time, because you're actually gonna hear that a similar thing was happening to me at the time when you go down to track 4. Or actually not track 4, but track 5, Jamie Remix / Donald Glover. Now at the time, I remember that I was at the Rattlesnake Espresso back when I still had quite a bit of money left for the inheritance, and this was around the time before I just got the job selling air conditioning units. I was there actually working on a sermon for my group that I believe, and at the time, this was right before I met these 3 guys, 2 of them being pastors, where I ended up going into the pastoral training program. Keep in mind, this was actually about a year after, let's see, it's about 2 or 3, let's see, about 2 or 3 years after I had left the church. I used to be an on fire, at the time I was an on fire evangelist kind of Christian guy. And because of something that happened at a Calvary chapel that I won't get into detail, I ended up leaving the church. And just in general, just didn't want to go back to church, didn't want to hear anything about it. I just wanted to do my own thing. I got tired of that life and everything that happened with that. So this goes, but then at the same time, I met this woman, also will not reveal the name, and we had been dating for about, let's see. Well, I would say we only dated for about a month. So when I noticed that there was too many red flags with the fact that there was just not going to be a relationship. Went down to the hub to have a dinner, and I believe that was the last time I saw her at the time, or no, it was actually at Subway. But for the Jamie remix / Donald Glover, when I was actually writing a sermon while at Rattlesnake Espresso, R.I.P. Rattlesnake, and the producer Dynasty said, what are we going to do for the next track? Because we just made Fat Ass. This Cream Corn actually was not recorded yet. So we made Cream Corn, I believe, the week after that. This one of Donald Glover we actually made this one before that. So we only had 3 tracks all ready to go. But he said, so what are we going to do? What's the next instrumental? What is the next idea for this arc? And I stopped writing the sermon and my notes, and I put the Bible down. So this was actually right before I just quit reading the Bible at the time. I just walked away from the faith for about 3-4 years, but this was right after I walked out. So maybe a year later is when I technically walked. But anyways, so coming back to it, so I actually put down I rolled over the notepad of paper that I had, one of those big binders, and I wrote down on there, the first thing that came to mind was remix. Let's do a remix. And at the time, other than Doris, I actually first bought Camp by Childish Gambino, which still to this day, even though it was in 2015, to this day, it is one of my all-time favorite rap records. So we ended up, what happened is I ended up saying to him on a text, hey, let's go ahead and make a remix to what we made of Jaime's a Fuckboy Guy, and we can just find we can steal a different beat from a different DJ, and then it'll go into the instrumental Heart by Childish Gambino, and then we're going to rap. So then at the time, when I wrote a song that was very, I guess from the heart, you would say, okay, quote unquote there, from the heart, about this woman, that was the last week I dated her. Because I thought that there was too many red flags. I got tired of her just hanging out with multiple different guys. She was not ready to be in a relationship. I thought it was weird that she kept using her army husband's credit card to pay for our dates and whatnot. I just thought nothing about this seems right. And I would rather have my dignity and my nobility and my morals. So what ended up happening is it was actually supposed to be like a praise kind of song saying, oh, I'm so happy I'm about to get into this relationship, with the whole Donald Glover Jamie remix song after we did the first part of the song of Jaime's a Fucker again. It ended up turning into a diss song. So from my lyrical perspective, and also the producer Dynasty felt that he was deeply saddened and he was deeply hurt by the fact that Donald Glover was more focusing on his career, and he walked away from the show Community. And you can hear that, heart-wrenching spoken word kind of dialect in his lyrics in the beginning of the song. Just because you in some movies, if you sit and listen to the lyrics, you'll see that he's literally yelling in there, "This ain't a fucking game, Donald." So both of us have had our hearts ripped out, and we're both trying to reconcile through the therapy, using our music as a therapeutic nihilism. Okay. So that was with that album, or that song, I mean. And so the next track to get was Big Daddy Papa Joins, Who I'm Afraid of Luigi. That was actually a song that was, I want to buy the track just to make sure I know which one this is. But yeah, it's this. Okay, so with this track, for track 6, we watched a movie called King of Kong, Fistful of Quarters. And that was the entirety of that song based off of was just that movie and how ridiculously cheated Steve Wiebe was in the movie in itself, of the whole trying to become the King of Kong in the video gaming world and how everybody was pretty much against him and whatnot. So that is the basis from that movie, and from that instrumental I took that from a Cypress Hill record. If you guys can believe it, I actually bought Cypress Hill's, I believe, first record or second record way back then in 2015. When going down to the Zia record store, I did not know what else to buy when I walked in that Friday morning. So I saw that and I randomly just bought it and absolutely loved the instrumental for the first track. I remember the rest of the CD was not that good. It was pretty much a one hit. In my eyes, they're like a one-hit wonder band. But anyways, I did love the instrumental, and I wanted to do Smoke Another Owl with trying to make the fans who have watched the movie feel better, saying that, well, I'm here smoking with Steve Wiebe at the end of the song, so let's go ahead and toke up. It was actually Billy Mitchell. Let's go ahead and toke up Billy Mitchell, because even though you're a horrible person and you're a prick, let's go ahead and smoke up together, even though you've done all these horrible things. So the next one is actually obviously, if you guys know me, this is my favorite track on the album, if not one of the best tracks I think we've ever made, which is Dead City Radio. And this one is, this one is featuring, I believe, yes, Buck Strickland. And on the last one, for the ending was Project, featuring Project on the record, where he actually didn't rap. This is one of the only few records that I can recall of somewhat recent memory. No, I would not say that this is recent, because this came out in April of 2015. So the record here featuring Project, this is one of the few records where he's actually not rapping on it. So there is another one of a rant that he does. I believe it was on the one about pool balls and pool cues. I forgot the name of the track. Pool Hustlers, I believe. Where he did the rant at the end of that one. But for this one, he talks about the movie Jurassic World with Chris Pratt. So now going to the next track here, which is what I just said, my favorite one, then Shoot On 'Em being next. Dead City Radio is the track. This is the, in my opinion, lead out single of the entire album. Probably other than the last song. But this album is, or this song, I believe, is the best rap that I've done on this one. And I actually got the name for this when I was doing some research on William S. Burroughs' books at the time, being that my brother let me borrow this book that he wrote, which was his first novel called Junkie, which was him living in the Great Depression era, basically selling drugs and being, I don't know if he was actually doing the drugs himself, but he was selling drugs like these specific kind of, I don't know if it was benzos or it was some kind of thing that required a needle. But anyways, so I actually got that. It was a dual book, I believe, that's not well known by him, that another guy wrote with him called Dead City Radio. So at the time, I was trying to get more into William S. Burroughs and trying to get away from Charles Bukowski and John Fonte. I tried to go in a different direction with, my whole book reading, which is my huge hobby. I mean, my longest ever job has been writing books other than making music. But anyways, so with this one, we actually took the beginning from an AVGN episode. I believe it was Ghosts and Goblins. And then that's how we ended up ending the track with that one at the time. This was still when I was living by myself. I remember making the ending of this song. I still remember that at the Shadow Tree apartment complex. So for that studios, I believe that was Canned Wine Studios. Not exactly sure. I believe that was I think the one before. No, this one was Canned Wine Studios. So anyways, this was the longest rap also I have on the album. I was just pretty much rapping about different things, like things I was mad about, things I wanted to comment on. I wanted to be a free-flowing kind of, I guess, performance where you would somewhat hear something like this, like in a freestyle kind of thing, even though it was all written out. It's very much along the lines of Big D, Big Ree from the Beast is Blunt Father album, where I wanted to have a feel of a throwback from when we made the Male Supremacy tape. So of the throwback of Big Daddy Puff Puff joint, even though I'm all the way up until Dad now, that's my new rap alias. But at the time, I wanted to write something long, but I wanted it to flow with the beat as best I could. To make it, I wanted this to be the best produced track. I wanted this to be, every track we try to make it the single. That's the intent every time we record. We try to make it the single in the album. But this one actually ended up being the best one that I think, in my opinion, is the best track on the record. Even with the chorus, I'm rapping slowly and concise. You can hear what I'm saying. You can understand what I'm saying for the most part, but it stays on beat and whatnot. And also how Dynasty opens up this track with, that he made a reference to Roddy Piper and that he was controversially an Illuminati sacrifice at the time, back in 2015. So this is when we recorded this, that occurred with Rowdy Piper dying from a supposed quote unquote heart attack. So that's what the reference that Dynasty made in his also. So, but we were trying to give a feel to the listeners, making them think, are these guys crazy? Are these guys off their rockers? Are these guys out of their mind? Being that if you listen to the lyrics from the producer, he talks about that the kids with the broken brains are the ones that listens to our records. We made such bizarre music before this, which was the Joust Central things Richard says. And also we were talking about last night how maybe we should make a mysteries episode about the mysterious Joust Central rock opera that we made that turned into things Julie says, but then we ended up losing it. It was supposed to be a 30-minute one track. So that will be a different episode for a different week. But with this one, we were giving the feel to the audience, making them think that you guys think we're the party guys, we're these kind of rappers. We're blowing money at strip clubs. We're trying to give off that vibe, but now we're reversing the vibe on the second half of the album to make you think something different. We're trying to expose ourselves a little bit more and expose our intent and who we really are on the record by making it a little bit more weird. So that leads up to Shoot on Them, where we completely pull that back once again and say, no, we are the hard asses. We are the gangsters. We are the clique. By this statement of this song. Shoot on Him was completely the producer Dynasty's idea for this track. He was the one that came up with the instrumental to use. I believe it was the title also, being that we were still watching a lot of UFC at the time. Shoot on Him is a reference of when a wrestler or a fighter shoots on another person, which is another word for a takedown. You would have to watch MMA to understand what I'm talking about here, because a lot of people, I'm sure, out there don't watch combat sports. Anyways, Shoot on Him being at 2 minutes and 53 seconds of this album, which is the third to last song. We wanted to do another grimy Earl Sweatshirt beat. This was, well, like I said before, the producer was the one that picked this one out. And when going through the lyrics, I wanted to do another throwback, but make it a bit harder and a bit grungier, and to be, for both of us to be not as goofy as we were on the last song, or not as exposed or open, but more hard in, let's just make this a fun track where we make people think we're hard asses. Okay. So for the Shoot on Them, at the end, I say to make sure to recycle, and when your bitch is acting strange. So the chorus here, Dynasty also was the one that wrote it and sung it. Well, did the kind of spoken word style. He didn't exactly sing, but more of a spoken word talk singing kind of thing. Where it said, if your bitch is acting strange, she's trying to pull a fade, there's only one thing to do. You got to fucking shoot on him. And that's when I came in and screamed, because I believe that he wanted me. I'm not exactly sure about this. I'm not positive, but I believe that he told me to just say it at first to match his tone. But I thought, well, if I yell it and scream it, it's going to make the track more fun to listen to, and it will get the listener more hyped if I yell. So I believe that's what happened, but don't take my word for it. I actually don't really remember. I remember making the end of the song because at this point in the album, for the last 3 tracks is when me and Buck Strickland moved in together. So the Shoot on Him was the first track I remember making when me and Buck Strickland moved in together. This is around the time when I got fired from Safeway. I was unemployed at this time when we both moved in together. My father was paying our bills at the time. I moved out from my place. It was still the same apartment complex, but it was on the other side of the complex. So Shoot on 'Em was the first track that we made to end the album at our new studios, which ended up turning to Neil Hospital Studios for the last 3 tracks here. So it's just us making people think a certain way and to have a certain feel about it, saying, no, we pulled the wool over your eyes, we're putting it right back on. So the next track, that's going to be Dynasty, Nebraska. This one I have no recollection of. He's going to have to tell you, you're going to have to go and call him and ask him about this track, because the only thing I remember about Nebraska at the time was that I blacked out. Okay. I believe I talked about this on the first retrospective, that there was also another track that I didn't recall at all. I'm not exactly sure. I would have to go back and listen to it. But anyways, this one I remember being in my room when we were recording, I believe, the political radio show that we used to do. This was in season 1 called the Chuck Stew Show. Welcome to Controversy. And around that time, I don't remember if we recorded Shoot on Him and then he recorded this the same night. I'm not exactly sure about it, but I do remember that this was the either first or second track when we moved into the new studio. So this is what I remember happening. I remember at one point blacking out from drinking too many Jaeger bombs and just drinking too much beer. I don't exactly remember. I remember we recorded the radio show before that and we were screaming and yelling about playing some game. Maybe it was like the original Super Smash Brothers on the N64. I actually don't really remember. I just remember that he found an instrumental by himself. I didn't pick out this instrumental. He was the one that found it. And that I, at some point, blacked out for about an hour and a half. I don't remember even falling asleep. It's complete. The memory is almost completely blurred, but I do remember waking up an hour and a half later and a track was done. And then I woke up and I don't even remember if he was even there that night, if he went home, because I believe at this point in time, he was living at 5th Street. So this is before he met his now fiance. He was living at 5th Street, and I forgot what the other cross street is, the one near the Fries. But anyways, and I remember waking up, and I don't remember him either being there or not being there. It was one of those moments where I had a complete and total memory lapse. I remember, though, listening it to the next day because he was the one that rapped on it and then sang the chorus. He wrote out the whole thing and then recorded it. So Nebraska, from what I remember, is about, at the time, something involving his ex-wife. She was supposed to move with her friends or family, I don't remember which one, to Omaha. So you can hear in the lyrics of, to go over the lyrical content of it, that was pretty much what the song was about. And that's pretty much it with that one. And for the final track, Candace the Genetic Craphammer, was actually a quote from, I don't know if it was a SmackDown or a Raw episode, where Vince McMahon referred to himself as the genetic hammer or something like that, something along those lines, and how Shane McMahon was a product of his loins. But for this track, this one specifically, I do remember recording. And because I remember this being a track, let's see, I mean, this one's at 4 minutes and 7 seconds here. Now, if you listen closely to the end of the song at 3 minutes and 55 seconds, all the way to 4 minutes and 7 seconds for Candace the Genetic Crap Hammer, because I was trying to recall and remember, why is the song 4 minutes if it was split into 2 dual songs? But we actually didn't start doing that until the next record. So it was actually a poem that I wrote for the producer to say, okay? It was a short poem that was supposed to be kind of a breakdown in the middle of the song before it goes back into chorus. But anyways, so I just remembered while listening to the song right now that we were supposed to start Fuck Yeah Fridays. The original intent when we went into a completely different direction was that, or if it was even going to be an 11th track on this record. So this is not disputed. I mean, this is disputed. You're going to have to ask the producer for more clarification on this part. But we were supposed to cover Fucking Young with Kaliukas. So I do remember actually writing out the lyrics for that song, but for whatever reason, we ended up not recording it. We stopped at track 10, which is very, like I said at the beginning of the show, it was very strange for us to do that because a lot of our CDs had many, many tracks that were very long. Even just looking at the Fuck Yeah Fridays, there's a lot of tracks on that one. And we usually just end things on a 12th track with a bonus song. This is one of the only few CDs that I can think of that we created that did not have a bonus track. But when you hear the beat, the bump sound at the end of the song, it's actually supposed to transition into the next album of Fuck Yeah Fridays, of Fucking Young. But for whatever reason, we were just not able to record it. Or we ended up recording something completely different that was based on a Tupac instrumental for the next record. And if you guys want to hear that, that would be episode 1. But for this retrospective, yeah, this, I mean, I would personally, this, like I said at the beginning, this is personally my favorite album. I don't know if I would say that this is my all-time favorite album that we've made, because last time that we, me and the producer checked up on this album, or on us recording music, we're at about 300, we're now somewhere between 300 and 350 songs that we've made, experimental, fully produced, spoken word compilations, anything that has to do with recording music, quote unquote. We're at 300 to 350 at this point, starting with the Hangover EP. So with this one, it was actually, so like I said in the last part, this was recorded at 2 different studios for this one. But it does end with Candace the Genetic Crap Hammer, and to give you guys a little bit of a playback on this one, which is kind of strange now thinking about it, because with just one album, I'm dissing 2 different women, which is kind of strange because if you guys, I mean, I've never made this information public, but when it comes to dating, I just didn't really do that much of it. I've had 3 girlfriends in my life, and 2 of them were my fiance for a period of time. Currently have a fiance now. But the thing is, with this album, Candace was actually, her name is actually in the track title. We called her the Crap Hammer. I came up with that because I was watching wrestling, and when Vince McMahon said that, I thought it would be funny to use that as the track title, being that I felt that she was so disgusting of a person that she just never bathed. When we went on dates, her hair would be really greasy, and I just don't know what I was thinking, but I was just so desperate for human touch and affection from a woman. I think that's why I put up with it. Altogether, we talked for about a month and a half, but then she made it clear on my birthday, out of all days, on my birthday, I remembered that she made it clear that she just wanted to be friends. And that she said she did not find me physically attractive, and this, and this. Doesn't matter. This was a long time ago. This was in 2015. So I remember that when I was at the Dave & Buster's in Tempe with my father and my brother, which was a whole nightmare in and of itself. That was the day when I was standing in the ticket line to give it my tickets that I won at those machines, is when she actually sent me the text message, which this was a couple days before my birthday, saying, hey, I'm going to go ahead and cancel the date. So found out that she wasn't really into me all that much, but then I was still talking to her for another 2 weeks just because I didn't want to put up with another possibly something happen, and now it's not happening. But now that I have the foresight looking back, I'm very glad that happened, being that I felt that she was very uncleanly at the time. I'm hoping at this point she has taken a shower by 2020. I don't know, but the thing is that that's what we were emulating, the Too Fucking Young song that we heard from Tyler, which was one of his big songs at the time, if not his biggest single at the time in 2015. So if you go back and listen to the lyrics, I actually did not hear the song beforehand. So when the producer showed me this instrumental and said he wanted for us to work on it, but make it about the woman who just broken up with me, or not breaking up, but she just said she wasn't interested. I actually had not heard the song before. So what happened was that it sounded like an instrumental that Tyler took from Kirby and the Crystal Shards video game for the N64. So that's why you hear me use that reference. I talk about two women in the song, and I felt that the producer, this is one of his best singing songs. This is one of his best ballads, being that I felt that he did such a good job where the chorus that is lined up in two break-ins, that one is actually about the first woman who track 5 was about, and then the woman after. So it actually took, so if you really think about this album did not take 10 weeks. This had to have taken a couple months at least, because in the time period that this all happened, from when I met the first woman to the next one, this was the span of about 4 or 5 months. So there's a possibility that it actually took about 3 to 4 months to record this entire album. I technically would give this album a 9 out of 10, if not a 10 out of 10. When looking back, I don't exactly know if there is an album that we made that's better than this one. I'm sure when it comes to production quality that there is, if I would just sit down and listen to the albums over again. The only one that I can think of my personal favorite that would be better than this one, like a 10 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10, would have to be Male Supremacy, because it's either this album or that one is my personal favorite, the one that I feel we did the best on. It's just the mood is right. There was magic in the album, and you can't recreate things like that. And believe me, I've tried with what you're going to hear in either next week's episode or the episode after that. We have tried to create magic in 2018. Well, it's actually 2017 to 2018 with the album Recovery Sundays, which is the last in the trilogy, even though we're still working on Monotone Mondays, Normal Past. But I have tried over and over again to recreate the magic and recreate the feeling of Awful Saturdays, with us recreating that fun but magical kind of like wizardry aspect into Recovery Sundays. Even though it ended up turning into its own album, which is fine, it just doesn't have the same feel as this one. This one is its own thing. It is its own little island, so to speak. Normal Past, for Awful Saturdays, it does hold a lot of nostalgic feelings for me being in that time period, even though you can pretty much, I mean, you can break down the facts from my end of the creativity aspect for the albums. From my end, you can see, you can notice that when it comes to these albums, I believe that my theory is as to why this one I believe is so good is because I was constantly depressed at the time. I had just gone out of a very bad relationship that almost turned into a marriage around this time period, which actually started out with the Hangover EP by LSG, the last LSG record. That was the last one. So that was the last one where there was there was just something where I just felt that my life was just not going well, and it kind of went in a downward slope for a long period of time. Even though when this, while creating this album, along with the Jow Central record, if you can even believe that, at this time period, even though I was single and didn't want to be at the time, struggling with the fact of the being with my fiance, even though I was very, very happy with the fact that I made that decision with the breakup, but didn't realize what that would entail in the future, which was constantly getting frustrated with the dating scene in Tucson, constantly getting frustrated. So that's where a lot of the feel of the lyrics and the tone of the record came from my point of view. And I believe it was probably from the same point of view as the producers, being that he was also in a marital crisis at the time. So we both were in a crisis at the time when making this record. But I know that there was a back and forth between me and him as to how many tracks should be goofy and how many tracks should be serious, because at the time, even though a lot of these songs are somewhat serious and in odd, strange ways heartfelt, I was very adamant against making any soulful kind of songs where I'm really pouring my heart out on the whole writing the lyrics thing. I was just focusing that when writing my second and third book, where I was just writing it in the form of poems, and I wanted to keep it there, and I wanted to keep this fun and exciting and not have to think about all the nasty things that were going on in my life at the time back in 2014 to 2015. I mean, this led up to about 2016. So anyways, I would say that Male Supremacy is probably my favorite album. I would have to go back and listen to it. I haven't listened to it in a while, but I do remember the last time I did listen to it, which was about, I would say less than a year ago, was when I actually sat there and listened to the whole thing. It might have been 2 years ago. No, I wouldn't say it was that long. I would say maybe about 10 or 11 months ago is the last time I listened to the whole album. I believe that one's the best one we've ever made, but I don't just take that with a grain of salt. I'm not sure about that myself. I have to look at it again. But with this one, it doesn't even compliment Fuck Yeah Fridays at all, because it's a completely, it feels like a completely different record. That one has more tracks. It feels like there's more insane creativity where it was off the rails, where this one was an arc from the first track to track 10. There was a subplot and a plot going on just with this album alone. And even though it's at 10 tracks, and usually we'll go to like 12, 13, 14 tracks to end an album, this one, just for whatever reason, like what I stated with my theories as to why this one is so good, my opinion is that this one is just in a league of its own. It's just its own thing. It's its own island, even though it's strangely goofy and whatnot, even with the cover picture of our old friend wearing a cyber goth mask. And then the friendship completely just, don't even know what happened with that person. And this was a time, like I said, is going to the pastoral training program. But I would give this either a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 with all the tracks on here. It's just good. It's concise, it's clean, but in a rugged, raw way. It's just, I would definitely put this in one of the best albums I've ever heard, would be Awful Saturdays. And that's really stretching it. I'm just talking about in the realm of music altogether.